The 5-episode Doctor Who spin-off show The War Between the Land and the Sea aired on the BBC in December 2025. Featuring the classic Doctor Who monster the Sea Devils, an ancient species that has hibernated under the ocean for millennia, the war between follows the tensions that ensue when they get sick of all the ocean pollution and rise from the deep to confront humanity. The organization UNIT, the Unified Intelligence Task Force, steps up to help mediate this conflict, but it's low-level clerk Barclay who ends up having the biggest role. Despite having very little promotion and very little Doctor Who-related branding, this show managed to garner some pretty great viewing figures for what it was, even outstripping some of the episodes of the most recent Doctor Who season. But while the opening episodes received a positive response from fans, the reception as the show went on was much more divided. I've seen countless opinions from people who loved the show overall and from people who hated it with a burning passion. So why was this show so polarizing? My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress, and today we're going to break down how the war between the land and the sea turned a promising start into mixed review hell. This video will have both spoiler-free and spoilery sections, so I will give you a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. Like all episodes of Doctor Who since 2023, The War Between the Land and the Sea was created under a distribution deal with Disney, which involved the mouse forking out some money for the production budget in return for the right to stream the show everywhere outside the UK and Ireland. It was recently announced that Disney is not continuing with this distribution deal, which perhaps explains why The War Between will be unceremoniously dumped onto Disney Plus at some unspecified date in 2026, even though the BBC already aired the show over the holidays. To be clear, Disney has never had creative control over Doctor Who or The War Between. The creative minds behind The War Between the Land and the Sea were current Doctor Who showrunner Russell T Davies and recurring Doctor Who writer Pete McTighe. Davies is responsible for some of the most beloved episodes of Doctor Who, especially during his first turn as showrunner from 2005 to 2010, but his recent work on the show has had a more mixed reception. McTighe's Doctor Who credits include 2018's Kerblam, 2020's Praxeus, and 2025's Lucky Day. Out of those 3 episodes, I found Lucky Day to be by far the strongest, and it actually made me really excited to see what McTighe would do with The War Between. I may have set my expectations a bit too high. But make no mistake, there were some parts of The War Between that I really liked, and I absolutely will be giving credit where it's due. And I'm really excited to chat about this show and the Whoniverse in general with all of you, so whether you agree with my opinions or not, leave a comment, let's discuss. If you like videos about books, science fiction, fantasy, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And be sure to subscribe to my free monthly newsletter to get updates on all my latest projects and content, and to get access to all my YouTube video essays 3 days before anyone else. You can find that linked in the description. Now let's dive into my thoughts about The War Between, starting with a spoiler-free review. The War Between the Land and the Sea is an Earth-based political thriller that deliberately doesn't require any prior knowledge of Doctor Who. The Doctor doesn't even show up, and even though fans of the old Sea Devils can enjoy seeing an update of a classic monster, these creatures are fully reintroduced to the viewer. Rather than continuing to call them Sea Devils, which was a name given to them by frightened sailors, The War Between confirms that their Latin name is Homo erectus, and they are colloquially referred to as Homo Aqua. We also meet some of the other creatures that, along with Homo Aqua, make up an association of species known as Aquakind. The tone of The War Between is more gritty and adult than Doctor Who, though not quite as gritty as the Torchwood spin-off from the 2000s. I think The War Between is pretty much suitable for some older children. Unlike with Doctor Who, where any blood is limited to a scratch or two, The War Between isn't afraid to show slightly more injury detail. They also almost let Kate Stewart swear. If you've seen my video about the most recent Doctor Who season, you'll know that I thought that series was great until it very much wasn't. In some ways, The War Between follows a similar pattern. To illustrate just how gripping the series opener is, when I turned on the first episode, my boyfriend said maybe he would watch the first 10 minutes, and not only was he hooked for the whole episode, he was eager to watch the next one by the end. After the first 2 episodes, though, The War Between started to drop off a bit. The 3rd episode in particular has some very odd pacing, with the majority of the episode covering the unit crew's descent into the ocean for a negotiating session, a sequence that drags quite a bit. But then the last 2 minutes of the episode drops some bonkers surprises that came so suddenly that I felt overwhelmed. I'll expand on my issues with episodes 4 and 5 in the spoilery sections. But keeping it vague, I felt those episodes contained some interesting ideas and some genuinely big swings that were unfortunately unfortunately undercut by some odd thematic choices and a plotline that I really didn't vibe with. The War Between is meant to be a highly political show, with themes about environmental justice and geopolitics. Indeed, one of Mick Tighe's Doctor Who episodes, Praxeus, was also about pollution, and it seems he was keen to explore that more in The War Between. This video's section about Salt and Aquakind will go more into this, but I did really appreciate how Aquakind were portrayed as nuanced and complex rather than uncomplicated helpless victims or cartoonish villains. I also appreciated that the show focused on the role of large corporations in creating the pollution crisis, and how the billionaires who run these corporations have an outsized influence on politicians that often means initiatives to clean up the environment fall by the wayside. However, there are a couple of moments where I'm not sure the show completely avoided the simplistic finger-wagging message that everything would be fixed if average everyday people just stopped littering. Of course, you shouldn't litter, but the primary big picture causes of pollution are bad waste management practices, not individuals who are too lazy to look for a bin. One consistent bright spot in the show was the performances of the lead actors. Russell Tovey, who previously appeared in a 2007 Doctor Who episode as Midshipman Alonzo Frame, absolutely shines as Barclay Pierre Dupont, a low-level unit employee who goes from booking taxis to serving as an ambassador for humankind. Another of the leads had also played another character in Doctor Who before, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who portrayed Martha Jones's sister Tish in Series 3. In The War Between, Mbatha-Raw plays Salt, an amphibious ambassador for Aquakind who forms a connection with Barclay. She brought an intensity to Salt's demeanor that I really appreciated, and made her feel both alien and sympathetic at the same time, an even more impressive feat given the amount of prosthetics involved. And Gemma Redgrave, who plays unit's leader Kate Lethbridge Stewart, built on her excellent performances from the character's previous appearances in Doctor Who to give the audience something both chilling and heart-wrenching. Another point in the show's favour is that it looks fantastic. The goofy sea devil designs from the original show have been updated into something that harkens back to the old look while also looking like something that could really crawl out of the ocean. The whole series was directed by Dylan Holmes Williams, who directed two of the most highly acclaimed episodes of Doctor Who in recent years, 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble. I tend to really vibe with the directorial decisions that Holmes Williams makes, and this series is no exception. The War Between has garnered a lot of comparisons to Torchwood's third season, Children of Earth, and for good reason. If I had a nickel for every time there was a 5-episode Doctor Who spin-off created by Russell T Davies about humanity facing down another species who threatens their world, but it turns out maybe humanity's own representatives are the true monsters, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? I think it's pretty safe to say that Children of Earth is a better show than The War Between, but there are a few things about Children of Earth that set it up for a slightly easier time. For example, the antagonists in Children of Earth are true extraterrestrials, rather than another species that inhabits Earth. There aren't any thorny moral questions about coexistence, the enemies are unequivocal invaders, and the chilling ethical conundrums the characters face in that series are to do with what it might take to make the invaders go away. Children of Earth episodes also have a runtime of about an hour each, while The War Between mostly sticks to 45-minute episodes. This means that Children of Earth has more time to flesh things out, which I think The War Between would have really benefited from, especially when it comes to material from the last episode. That said, The War Between and Children of Earth both hugely benefit from being a serialized story, because it means you can have some insane cliffhangers that make viewers keen to watch the next episode. That's not usually something you get with Doctor Who's Monster of the Week format, with the exception of the occasional 2-part story. As with Children of Earth, there are plenty of scheming politicians in The War Between, but unfortunately I found them much more lacking. I don't necessarily mind it when antagonists are straight up selfish and evil, because some people are just like that. But I expect them to talk the way normal people talk, and some of the villains' dialogue in The War Between was really on the nose. There's one character, a water company boss, whom the Prime Minister always listens to because he's his biggest donor, and I feel like we could have gotten that impression without the characters repeatedly explicitly reminding us of that. I also think it's hilarious that the evil American general is called General Gunsberg. Get it? Because Americans like guns. The devil's in the details, as they say, and most of my criticisms about The War Between come down to the execution rather than the general idea. But to expand on that more, I'm going to have to talk spoilers. So if you're trying to avoid spoilers, save this video for later and come back when you've seen the show. Otherwise, onward. Our main character, Barclay, is something of an everyman, and he came across to me as instantly relatable. He isn't some highly trained unit soldier, rather he's just some guy who accidentally ends up on a highly sensitive mission due to a clerical error. But the empathy and respect he displays toward Homo Aqua catches the eye of the Aquakind ambassador, Salt, who demands that he become the representative for the humans. It's a testament to Barclay's earnest passion for doing what's right that he eagerly takes up this mantle, determined to give normal people like himself a voice. I really liked seeing Barclay's dynamic with his family, his teenage child Kirby and his ex-wife Barbara. They're not perfect people, but it's lovely to see how Barclay and Barbara still come together to care for Kirby despite their own differences. Barbara is a particularly interesting character because she spends most of the show being quite abrasive toward Barclay, especially at the beginning. I mean, she clearly doesn't like him as much as she used to, given that they divorced. And even though she can be mean at times, I don't think her behavior is completely unreasonable, given that she's been yanked out of her normal life and forced to hole up in a hotel because of her annoying ex's bonkers new job. Nonetheless, Barbara shows a willingness to support Barclay at key moments, including comforting him when he starts to crack under pressure and warning him about a trap that Unit has forced her to set for him. The line where she says, "You don't have to be strong for me," was especially lovely. Ironically, the moments of support and affection that Barbara shows towards Barclay are all the more genuine because she doesn't seem to like him much most of the time. Even if she doesn't love him as a partner anymore or even like him as a friend, she still respects him as the father of her child and wants the best for him at the end of the day because of that. Barclay's relationship with Kirby seems to be a very healthy one, with Barclay consistently listening to Kirby and taking their opinions on board. In fact, it's because of Kirby that Barclay feels so motivated to come to a deal with Homo Aqua that will result in the humans cleaning up their pollution and the species living together in peace. In a diplomatic talk in episode 2, instead of sticking to the politician-approved script that Unit has given him, Barclay delivers a passionate speech about humanity's failure to care for the environment. He believes that his generation has to fix this problem to show their kids that they care, and he even mentions to Kirby that listening to Kirby talk about environmental issues gave him the inspiration to speak out against the large companies polluting the earth. Of course, as a parent, he wants Kirby to grow up in a better world. Furthermore, when Salt reveals that her children died from humanity's pollution, Barclay uses the fact that he's a parent to empathize with her and build more of a rapport. So we have a really strong basis for Barclay's character, with clear personal motivations for why he wants the negotiations to succeed. We don't even need to add anything else to give him personal stakes in this matter, right? Right? Okay, so Barclay and Salt fall in love, and I didn't like it. I guess I should have seen it coming, given that Gugu Mbatha-Raw is knockout gorgeous even with all those fishy prosthetics, and I don't think you'd make a homo amphibian that attractive unless there was a romance on the cards. But you know what else Gugu Mbatha-Raw is? A damn good actress, and she deserved something better and more interesting than this. The romance is used as a Romeo and Juliet type of device, bridging the human and Homo Aqua worlds and showing that there might be hope for mutual understanding and peace. But I really don't think Barclay and Salt's relationship needed to be romantic to make them motivated to help one another. As I said, Barclay's motivations for wanting harmony between the species were already there, and the two of them could easily have developed a friendship based on their mutual desire for peace without it having to turn into a weird interspecies romance. Barclay and Salt's connection to each other was referenced several times in a way that made me assume some kind of bigger thing was drawing them together, like a science fiction timey-wimey sort of deal, but I guess not. They were just in love. Doctor Who has done this sort of thing a couple of times in recent seasons, where the Doctor will reference that something must be drawing him and his companion together, and then absolutely nothing comes of it. I would kind of prefer it if there was a timey-wimey excuse for Barclay and Salt's romance, because then maybe it would feel a small step above completely pointless. I'm kind of sick of the idea pushed in a lot of media that romantic love is the most powerful motivator. And it's hard not to see the war between as falling into that tired old trope by dodging what could have been some really powerful family-based motivations for Salt and Barclay in favor of a romance that I can only describe as cheap and lazy. Not even the actors' brilliant performances could save it for me, even though they sold it about as well as I think anyone could. At the end of the show, Barclay and Salt's connection has grown so strong that it has triggered a chord, a process by which two species can connect on a deeper level. This basically means that Barclay grows gills. And in a baffling sequence set to a mournful cover of Heroes, Barclay has a tearful phone conversation with his family and then swims away into the ocean with Salt. In the section about the show's ending, I'm going to go over why I feel this sequence was awfully jarring within the context of the show's last episode. But just on a character level for Barclay, I struggle a lot with the implications of this scene. We don't hear what Barclay and his family are saying to each other on the phone, but given that they're all crying, I worry that he's saying goodbye to them for good. It's never clarified where Barclay and Salt plan to go live, or whether Barclay plans to split his time between living in the ocean and coming to visit his family on land. I'd like to believe he intends to visit Kirby frequently, because otherwise that would completely conflict with his characterization up to this point, but then why were they crying so much on the phone? It's also possible that they were crying because Barclay was telling them about how 90% of Homo Aqua has been murdered, more on that later, but then their conversation feels way out of place in this sequence. I like to think I'm not the kind of viewer who needs everything spelled out for me, but I feel like if you have a sequence so confusing that I'm left questioning whether our main character has suddenly turned from a loving father into a deadbeat dad, that might be the show's fault. Based on the conversations I've seen online, it seems like most of the viewers didn't care for the romance or this ending for Barclay. I don't think writers should make story decisions based on what will be the most popular, but when a subplot undermines the main character's most lovable traits and wasn't even necessary for the main relationship to work, I kind of think it might not be the right decision. The romance doesn't have quite the same negative effect on Salt's characterization, but I think it took up some oxygen that could have been used to explore her character in a more interesting way. So now let's tackle the show's leading lady and the new and improved Sea Devils. Salt isn't your typical Homo Aqua. She's a more human-looking subspecies, Homomorphous sapiens, that gets referred to as Homo amphibia. Unlike the less human-looking Homo Aqua, she can speak human languages, though it's unclear whether she's significantly more intelligent than Homo Aqua, given that we see the humans having a conversation with Homo Aqua via translating software in the first episode. I'm still not entirely sure what the biological relationships between Homo Aqua and Homo amphibia are. For example, can they interbreed, or are they completely separate species? I'm also not quite sure where the line gets drawn between Aquakind and general sea life. Salt mentions that dolphins are a part of Aquakind, but I don't know whether she meant all dolphins or a specific kind of dolphin. In general, I wanted more of an exploration of Salt's relationship with Aquakind and what her undersea community means to her. After she rescues Barclay from an explosion in episode 4 and the two escape from Unit's clutches to strike out on their own, Salt acts almost manic, referring to herself as liberated. This would suggest that she found her world somewhat oppressive and that she wanted to leave the ocean to experience the land properly. However, later in the episode, Salt solemnly informs Barclay that Aquakind will see her as a traitor for saving him while so many of her people died. She says that she'll be punished by being exiled from Aquakind, forced to swim alone in an existence that she describes as soulless. So it seems Salt does crave her connection with Aquakind after all. In the final episode, we see Salt acting as an ambassador for Aquakind again. So what happened to her being exiled? How did she get accepted back into the fold? While the romance between Salt and Barclay doesn't have alarming character implications for Salt like it does for Barclay, I still feel like the romance was used as a shortcut to give Salt personal stakes in the outcome of the negotiations. If we'd learned more about what Salt's relationship with Aquakind means to her, we could have developed her personal motivations in a more interesting way. Salt's personality kind of shifts throughout the season. Of course, sometimes we see her in a work environment when she's negotiating with the humans, and sometimes we see her off-duty hanging out with Barclay. The trouble is, I find that her playful, bubbly behavior in episode 4 is so different to her stoic demeanor as ambassador that I have a hard time buying it. Even if someone represses their more upbeat personality at work, you would still expect hints of their real self to come through. With Salt, there were no indications that she's the kind of character who would enjoy smashing glass and happily yelling in an abandoned building, possible unit pursuit be damned, until we see her doing it. An aspect of her playful side that felt more believable was her intimidating performance when she and Barclay are trying to steal a mobile phone from a kid. I could definitely imagine an ambassador who spends most of her time trying to negotiate diplomatically, having fun getting what she wants just by being properly scary for once. Overall, I would have liked to see some more consistent characterization from Salt. We see in the second episode that Salt can change gender presentation, but it only happens in this one moment and never comes up again. I think it was supposed to to be a nod to how some species of fish can switch genders, and overall seems intended to highlight Salt's affinity to deep-sea creatures despite her human-like appearance. But given that it doesn't seem relevant to her character in any way, it felt like a bit of a pointless gimmick. I didn't need it to be some kind of Chekhov's gun that comes in handy to save the day, nor did I need some kind of giant treatise about Aquakind's views on gender. But if you can cut that aspect of Salt's portrayal without changing anything, I would submit that that trait wasn't very well integrated into her character. By contrast, if we consider Barclay's non-binary child Kirby, their gender identity seems properly integrated into their character, even though we don't get an in-depth explanation of what being non-binary means to them. In episode 1, Kirby insists on referring to Homo Aqua by their scientific name, Homo spondles, which could just generally speak to Kirby's preference for describing things accurately. But as a non-binary person, Kirby has probably had to deal with people getting their pronouns wrong or otherwise using terms for them that they don't align with. So Kirby would naturally be extra attentive to using the correct terms for other beings. Kirby also shows a strong desire for making the world a better, fairer place, which is something that a lot of young people in general care about, but Kirby might especially care about that because they know the world doesn't treat them fairly in a lot of ways. Even though their identity isn't portrayed as a big deal in the show, we can read these undertones into Kirby's behavior because their gender is well incorporated into their character. It's not just the non-binary characters either. I could point out all the ways in which Barclay being a man is incorporated into his character, or Kate being a woman is integrated into her character. No equivalent undertones exist for Salt's gender fluidity. She's pretty much just treated like a woman for most of the show. And maybe she does identify more with her feminine side, in which case it would be interesting to know how she feels about being able to shift her gender presentation, but we don't know because we never get any more exploration of this. I would also have loved to learn more about how Salt interacts with the different political movements within Aquakind. We get a decent exploration of the different factions at play on the human side, the billionaires who want humanity to crush Aquakind so they can keep dumping trash into the waterways without consequence, the politicians who tend to side with the billionaires that fund them, and Unit who wants a negotiated peace between the species. But we see that Aquakind has their own political factions too. While Salt is interested in diplomacy, she is by no means easy on the humans. As someone whose children died because of pollution, she knows every second counts when it comes to saving her people. She pushes hard for humanity to clean up their mess within the tightest time frame they can muster, and at one point even tries to reclaim Aquakind's sovereignty over all waterways. She happily co-signs a moment in episode 2 where Aquakind create a hurricane of all the trash humans have dumped into the waters, even though this tactic could be hazardous to innocent people because she isn't above occasionally resorting to violence to try and force humanity to act. However, after Salt goes on the run with Barclay, Aquakind sends a new Homo amphibia ambassador named Tide to liaise with the humans. Tide seems more ideologically militant than Salt, and even refers to humans as dirt that must be cleansed, genocidal rhetoric that Salt would never dream of using. We also find out that some Aquakind have taken it upon themselves to melt the ice caps, which threatens to raise sea levels, drown the land, and release enough carbon dioxide into the air that humans may not be able to breathe anymore. Tide tells the humans that they must clean up all their trash within 5 years, an impossibly tight timeline, or else Aquakind will finish melting the ice caps and kill them all. This goes way beyond anything Salt is comfortable with, and she tells Barclay she didn't know her people were doing this. I didn't necessarily need all the behind-the-scenes details from Aquakind's political debates, but I wanted a better idea of whether Aquakind's more unsavory tactics were co-signed by a majority of the populace, or just the actions of a few dissidents. As it stands, the lack of knowledge about which factions of Aquakind are responsible for different approaches risks making the viewer feel that Aquakind's goals are inconsistent. Getting a little more insight into Aquakind politics throughout the show may have also helped explain why Salt returned as an ambassador in the final episode despite her exile. In general, I enjoyed that the war between portrays Aquakind not as perfect victims, but as a society as complex as our own, with a wide diversity of opinions that can sometimes include violent tendencies. Especially in the first 2 episodes, where Salt uses the garbage hurricane as a pressure tactic, I got the sense that the show was inviting viewers to question why it's okay for humans to dump trash on Homo Aqua, but not for Homo Aqua to dump the trash back onto humans. We wouldn't accept it if Homo Aqua decided to flood our homes with pollution unprovoked and then refused refuse to clean it up in a timely fashion, so where's our urgency to correct our own behavior? That's not to say that it's good for Homo Aqua to endanger innocent humans, but it highlights a double standard that echoes real-life geopolitical conflicts all over the world. I thought the creators came up with some super inventive and visually striking ways for Aquakind to manipulate the environment to get a leg up on humans. The concrete dissolving into water and drowning the soldiers in episode 1 was really cool, and I also loved the garbage raining from the sky in episode 2. However, I'm not sure I got a great sense of how the broader world was affected by Aquakind's machinations. Most of the garbage from that trash hurricane seems to get cleaned up very quickly. We have a couple of references to a curfew and the need for permits, and some signs showing that beaches are closed. But there's not much indication of how Aquakind's disruptions might be affecting businesses' global trade and the average person's life. When Aquakind begin to melt the ice caps, we see some videos of collapsing ice shelves on a screen, but we don't see whether any human settlements or fishing boats are affected by these changes. Giving us a little more detail about the effects of Aquakind's tactics would help raise the stakes for coming to an agreement between the species. Now let's turn our attention back to the human side by looking at an aspect of the show that unfortunately kind of disappointed me. The reason I was super excited to see more of a focus on Unit in this series is because of the events of the last episode that Pete McTighe wrote for Doctor Who, Lucky Day. In that episode, Unit goes up against a conspiracy theorist called Conrad, who accuses the organization of making up the aliens it fights in order to mislead the public. Of course, Unit isn't fabricating anything, so Conrad is spreading dangerous misinformation. But that episode also shows some concerning behavior from Unit. They seem to have the authority to arrest people, and at the end of the episode, the organization's leader Kate Stewart unleashes an alien monster on Conrad. Colonel Ibrahim, one of Kate's most trusted officers, even mentions that Geneva will have something to say about her decision to deploy the monster onto a civilian. However, there is no reference to this event in the war between, and if anything, Unit's behavior just gets more concerning. When Ibrahim is tragically shot and killed, Unit hunts down the suspect in his murder and executes the supposed gunman with no due process. This is straightforwardly portrayed as business as usual, with no doubts raised as to whether they got the right man, even though there was no trial to determine whether he was innocent or guilty. In episode 4, when Barclay and Salt are on the run, Barclay says of Unit, "If you disobey the rules, you vanish." This is super concerning, and even though Barclay seems to think Kate will give him a fair shake if he can get in touch with her, I don't think an organization is super ethical if you can only get fair treatment by going directly to the boss. In fact, the only part of Unit whose morality is interrogated at all is Kate herself. Kate continually pushes herself past the point of exhaustion, and she keeps being dismissive of Ibrahim, who she's secretly dating. Side note, I really don't like that Kate is dating her employee, and the only comment we get about it is Unit scientific advisor Shirley Ann Bingham telling Kate after Ibrahim's death that everyone knew and was happy for them. They shouldn't be happy for them, they should report Kate to Human Resources. Throughout the show, we see Kate's mental health unraveling, and she makes some pretty dark decisions in the process of trying to keep herself together. For example, when her therapist indicates that Kate might not be fit for duty due to her grief over Ibrahim's death and her general exhaustion, Kate blackmails the therapist into upping her medication dose and letting her stay at work. I really do like the portrayal of Kate's grief, and I think Gemma Redgrave especially excels at showing Kate trying to push on despite her devastation. There's a scene at the end of the last episode where Kate pulls a gun on a guy who throws some trash on the beach, and I'll have more to say about that from a thematic perspective in the next section. But I think this scene works well as a character moment for Kate. Not only has Kate recently lost her boyfriend, but she's just found out that world military leaders genocided Aquakind right under her nose. Now that Aquakind can't pose as much of a threat to their profits anymore, corporations and governments are going to go right back to polluting just as much as they did before. All Kate could do was help Barclay and Salt reunite, but that's peanuts when Salt's people are going through untold suffering. Kate must feel so powerless and helpless in this moment. So when she sees a guy littering on the beach, even though his transgression is so tiny that it barely matters, she seizes the opportunity to exert some kind of control over the situation. I am a little disappointed that the war between didn't feature any consequences for Kate sicking the monster on Conrad in Lucky Day. There's no indication that Geneva has investigated her or even given her a slap on the wrist. When a character does bad things, I don't need the show to look me in the eye and go, by the way, this is bad. Like, I'm an adult, I can tell that blackmailing your therapist is unethical. But given that Lucky Day hinted Kate might suffer consequences for her behavior, it's a shame that those consequences apparently never came. In addition to characters like Kate, Shirley, and Ibrahim who have appeared in Doctor Who before, we also got the return of General Austin Pierce, who appeared in Torchwood Children of Earth as a US military general and has apparently now taken a job at UNIT. I actually quite like Pierce because he has this way of being buttoned up and professional, but also surprisingly earnest and cheesy at the same time. There's a scene where he references Heroes by David Bowie by going, "As a great man once said, we could be heroes. Let's save the world." And I think coming from any other character, I would have hated that, but because it was coming from Pierce, I was like, yes, General, you got it! My one criticism of Pierce's inclusion was that I would have loved to see at least an oblique reference to how he feels about his role in the events of Children of Earth. He goes along with and even spearheads some pretty awful decisions in that series, so it would have been nice to see hints of whether he regrets what he did and whether it informs how he approaches relations with Homo Aqua. Unfortunately, the new members of UNIT introduced in the War Between were super forgettable. Sergeant Chakri is almost a perpetual presence in the War Between, and yet I feel like I know very little about her personality or her relationship with any of her teammates. I liked UNIT scientist Min So's explanations of Aquakind biology, and I like that her demeanor was that of an enthusiastic science nerd, but I still didn't feel like I knew her well. And I could not tell you a thing about Louise Mackey or Jane Hart. The only reason I felt like I could get a bit of a handle on Steve Chesney's character was that he's played by George Robinson, who also portrayed Isaac in Netflix's Sex Education, and I detected some flickers of Isaac's sardonic humor in his performance. But that's largely due to the actor's delivery rather than the actual writing. We've covered a lot of ground so far, but I've saved the trickiest part of the show for last. That's right, it's time to talk about that ending. It's not unusual for a show to just be mid, but the reason why I think The War Between might claim the title of Doctor Who's most controversial spin-off largely revolves around its ending. In the final episode, the show's scheming politicians secretly turn Barclay into the carrier of a man-made virus that will kill Aquakind. When Barclay goes to visit Salt, he passes the virus on to her, and she unwittingly spreads it through Aquakind's algae network. The virus rages through the population and kills 90% of all Aquakind. Thus, humanity wins the war by committing genocide, and the remaining Aquakind agree to be confined to a sort of reservation in the Pacific Ocean because they don't feel like they have any leverage anymore. Salt refers to this reservation as a hunting ground because she knows it won't be as safe as the humans would like Aquakind to think it is. This is an absolutely horrific turn of events, and I kind of commend the show for having the guts to do something this drastic. In the end, the humans are the bad guys, and they win. It's a hugely heavy conclusion to sit with. However, I do think the writers were boxed into having an ending somewhere along these lines, and it stems from the War Between's relationship to the main show. See, Doctor Who has an ongoing tension between the format of the show and its subject matter. At least once or twice a season, the Doctor must stop some kind of alien or monster from taking over or destroying the planet, often with public consequences that a lot of people notice. A worldwide alien invasion would transform how regular people view their place in the universe, with vast consequences for society at large. But this is in tension with the fact that Doctor Who is usually a monster of the week type format, and even when there are multi-part stories, the show typically has to end up back in some kind of status quo. We saw the show deal with this conundrum back in the 2000s, where the frequent alien invasions of the 9th and 10th Doctor eras eventually had to establish a version of Earth where the public was aware of aliens and their potential dangers. When Stephen Moffat took over as showrunner in 2010, he apparently decided that this alien-aware version of society was too unlike our own to serve as a good status quo backdrop for Monster of the Week adventures. So Series 5 of the show sees the crack in the fabric of the universe erasing the alien invasions of Series 1 through 4 from the memories of most humans. Any Doctor Who episode that deals with another intelligent species inhabiting Earth necessarily has to end with humans still dominating Earth society. Two examples of stories that follow this plotline are the Hungry Earth two-parter from Series 5 and the Zygon Invasion two-parter from Series 9, both of which end with the other species in question just sort of going into hiding again and leaving the humans alone. Having Aquakind back off like this in the War Between would seem like a cop-out, so the humans committing genocide was one of the only options to facilitate a return to the status quo for the purposes of the main show. But whether or not the ending is particularly surprising, the important part is, did it work? Well, I'm not so sure. I felt like the mechanics of the virus's transmission weren't as well developed as I would have liked. It wasn't clear to me whether Barclay or anyone else worked out that he was the carrier who spread the virus to Homo Aqua. And if Barclay did find out, does he blame himself? Does Salt blame him? Also, at this point, Salt was exiled from the rest of Aquakind, which I assumed meant she was cut off from Aquakind's algae network. So how did she manage to spread the virus to everyone else? I'm also not sure why Salt doesn't die if she was the first one the virus was transmitted to. Maybe it was engineered not to kill her so that she could spread it to more beings before the deaths started. It's also not clear to me whether the architects of this scheme, the Prime Minister and the evil generals, suffer the wrath of Homo Aqua like Salt warns they will. When Salt makes her threat, we see some scenes of these three characters drowning in the shower or in a car filled with water. The way this sequence is edited has me confused about whether these scenes are intended as flash forwards that will actually happen or just dream sequences of the bad guys imagining what might happen to them. We see only one possible fate for each character, which could add weight to the argument that they're flash forwards. But these scenes immediately cut to shots of the bad guys looking worried, which could indicate that they're reacting to these imagined possibilities. However, they could just as easily be reacting to Salt's threatening words. I would like to believe the villains suffer some kind of consequence because it would show that there's a sliver of justice still left in this world. But this strangely edited sequence isn't the only baffling thing about the show's ending. With the show's conclusion being as heavy as it is, it feels like the writers wanted to end on something of a happy note, even if it's just a personal triumph. So as I said before, we end with Barclay growing gills and swimming happily away with his true love Salt. I feel like this ending is only uplifting if you actually like the romance, but the show certainly wants you to feel happy at this turn of events. But even if I was on board with the romance, this ending still feels tonally inconsistent because we just witnessed genocide on a massive scale. If you're going to end your show like that, I kind of want to sit with the weight of it, not get yanked into a cheesy scene of Barclay frolicking with his fish girlfriend. There's a gorgeous emotion in Barclay and Salt's last diplomatic talk, where it seems like Salt needs some space to mourn the fact that Barclay's people just genocided most of hers, only for it to be undermined a few minutes later when she takes him back anyway. The mid-credits scene, where Kate pulls her gun on a littering jogger, felt similarly jarring from a tone and theme perspective. As I mentioned before, I think this scene works best as a slightly comedic character moment for Kate. My boyfriend interpreted it through that lens and he loved it. But because it's the last scene of the show, viewers would be forgiven for expecting a kind of final restating of the thesis, or some indication as to why the story mattered. And unfortunately, if we make that assumption, the only possible reading of this scene is that Kate, as one of the show's protagonists, is telling the viewers that we ought to clean up our litter. This is one of the instances I was talking about in the spoiler-free section, when I said that the show occasionally undermines its own message about how we have to hold corporations accountable for their pollution. It's a less in-your-face lecture than the one the 13th Doctor gives at the end of the series' 12-episode Orphan 55, but it's still pretty overt, especially because it creates a bookend with the opening of the show, where we see a sailor chucking a plastic bottle into the ocean. You can't make a show where the point is that corporations will destroy Earth for profit and then have "remember to pick up your litter, guys" as the final message. Well, you can, but then people like me will complain about it on YouTube. So what's next for the Whoniverse? Well, it was recently announced that there will be a Doctor Who Christmas special in 2026, and even though I really didn't like how the last season of the show ended, I'm keen to see what will happen next despite myself. I mean, it's Doctor Who, I'm gonna watch it no matter what. 2026 will also bring a mixed media story about the fugitive Doctor called Circuit Breaker, which will span audio dramas, comics, and other media. The fugitive Doctor, of course, is a sort of lost, unnumbered Doctor who was first introduced in Series 12, and from the little we saw of her on screen, I absolutely love her. Even though I haven't had the chance to get super deep into Doctor Who's expanded media yet, I'm actually really excited for this one because I desperately need more fugitive Doctor stories. And because it's masterminded by Esme Jacemi Pearson, who has written some Doctor Who novels as well as her own original fiction, and I really like her novel The Principle of Moments. This one. Even though it will be a little while before the Whoniverse returns to our screens, I'm still going to be making plenty of video essays about Doctor Who, so be sure to subscribe if that's something you're interested in. Please let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Have you watched The War Between, or do you plan to? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you feel somewhere in the middle? Are you interested in the 2026 Doctor Who Christmas special, and what are your predictions for it? Share all of your thoughts in the comments because I'm super excited to discuss. And remember to subscribe to my monthly newsletter to make sure you never miss any of my hot takes and to get early access to all my videos. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.